Are you ready to discover what really haunts Germany's nights? Tonight, I'm going to tell you 13 urban legends that have been whispered around campfires, passed down through generations, and kept people awake at night. Some say they're just tales to scare children, others swear they're true. After all, every legend has its believers and its victims. So lock your doors, turn down the lights, and stay close. Imagine the early 1300s, a massive castle perched on top of Mount Hohenzollern, rising above the clouds like something straight out of a fairy tale. But this isn't just any castle, it's the ancestral home of the Hohenzollern family, one of Germany's most powerful royal dynasties. Kunigunde from Orlamund lived here with her husband and her 2 children. She was young, beautiful, and had a happy life until her husband died. But after a while, she fell madly in love with Albrecht the Fair, a noble man from the Hohenzollern family. Albrecht once made a casual remark that 4 eyes stood between them and their happiness. He meant the legal obstacles to their marriage, but Kunigunde, well, she took it literally. She thought he was talking about her children. In a decision that would haunt her forever, Kunigunde allegedly did the unthinkable. She ended the life of her own children. She pushed a needle into their skulls, making it look like they died from natural causes. But when she went to Albrecht expecting them to finally be together, he was horrified. He rejected her, saying he'd never meant for this to happen. Overwhelmed by guilt and grief, Kunigunde spent the rest of her life trying to atone for her crimes. She founded a monastery and lived as a nun until her death. But apparently, that wasn't enough to find peace. For hundreds of years, people have reported seeing something, or rather someone, walking these halls. A woman dressed all in white, appearing just before tragedy strikes the Hohenzollern family. Until today, she is known as the White Lady from Hohenzollern. But she doesn't appear only in Hohenzollern Castle. She also haunts other castles connected to the family. People reported seeing a woman dressed in white, sometimes wearing a veil, and often carrying a bunch of keys at her waist. Some say they've felt sudden cold spots in the corridors, or heard the jingling of her keys when no one else is around. Deep in the Black Forest, between ancient trees and foggy silence, lived a young hunter named Max. He was in love with a beautiful girl named Eva, but her father had one condition for their marriage. Max had to prove himself as the best marksman in the region. The problem was Max's aim had gotten worse with each passing day. The more he practiced, the more he missed. With the shooting competition approaching, desperation crept into his heart like a poison. One night, while drinking at the local tavern, an old hunter named Casper approached him. His eyes gleamed strangely in the candlelight as he whispered about a way to never miss a shot again. All Max had to do was meet him at the Wolf's Glen at midnight, a place mothers warned their children about, where even the bravest hunters wouldn't go after dark. Despite his fear, Max went. Under the light of a blood-red moon, Casper showed him how to cast magic bullets. 6 will hit whatever target you choose, Casper explained with a twisted smile. But the 7th belongs to the Dark One himself. The bullets were cast with lead, blood, and pieces of a dead man's eyes. Max took the bullets, telling himself it was just this once, just to win the competition and marry his beloved Ava. But with each perfect shot, the bullet's dark power grew more addictive. He didn't know that Casper had made a deal with the devil, and Max's soul was the price. On the day of the competition, Max had 1 bullet left, the 7th bullet. As he aimed at the target, the bullet curved in the air and headed straight for his beloved Ava. In that moment, Max realized the terrible price of his perfect aim. To this day, hunters in the Black Forest warn about making deals in the Wolf's Glen. They say sometimes, on moonless nights, You can hear the sound of shooting and see a desperate man trying to master his last shot, forever cursed by his deal with the devil. This is the legend of the cursed marksman. The story became so famous throughout Germany that it was turned into an opera by Karl Maria von Weber, where the tale of magic bullets and deals with the devil continues to captivate audiences to this day. In a remote monastery nestled between misty mountains, young Sister Maria began her new life. The year was 1742, and at just 18 years old, she had taken her vows to dedicate her life to God. But fate had other plans. The monastery was peaceful during the day, filled with the gentle sounds of prayers and the sisters going about their duties. But at night, when darkness crept through the Gothic windows, strange things began to happen. It started with whispers. Sister Maria would wake in the middle of the night to hear someone softly calling her name. Following the voice, she'd find herself in the monastery's oldest corridor, where the air was always cold, even in summer. There, she began to see her, a nun dressed in the traditional habit, but something was terribly wrong. Dark stains covered the front of her robes, dripping onto the stone floor, disappearing by morning as if they were never there. At first, Maria tried to ignore these encounters, but the ghostly nun appeared more frequently, always at midnight, always with blood streaming down her clothes. Other sisters started to see her too. Some said they heard weeping in empty rooms. Others claimed they felt icy touches on their shoulders when praying alone in the chapel. One elderly sister finally revealed the monastery's dark secret. Many years ago, a young nun named Agnes had lived there. She was beautiful and kind, but she harbored a forbidden love for a nobleman from the nearby village. They would meet in secret, late at night in the monastery garden. Their love affair continued for months, hidden from the watchful eyes of the other sisters. But their secret couldn't stay hidden forever. When the Mother Superior discovered their meetings, Agnes was locked in her cell as punishment. But love makes people desperate. One stormy night, Agnes tried to escape with her lover. They planned to run away together, to start a new life far from the monastery's confining walls. They never made it. Whether it was the other sisters, angry villagers, or divine punishment, no one knows for sure. But Agnes was found the next morning, her body broken and bloody at the bottom of the monastery's highest tower. Some say she was pushed, others believe she jumped when she realized she couldn't escape. Her lover was never seen again. Since that night, Agnes' restless spirit has wandered the halls. They say she appears to those who are struggling with their own temptations, her bloody appearance a stark warning about the price of breaking sacred vows. Young novices who consider leaving the monastery often report seeing her, the sight so terrifying that they quickly recommit themselves to their religious life. Sister Maria herself had been contemplating leaving the monastery when the haunting began. After her encounters with the Bleeding Nun, she remained devoted to her calling until her death many years later. Even today, visitors to German monasteries and convents report similar sightings. A nun in blood-soaked robes appearing in empty corridors or beside lonely chapel pews. The temperature drops dramatically when she's near, and some claim to hear her final words, a warning about the consequences of betraying sacred promises. The forests around Brunswick hold many secrets, but none as terrifying as what happens on foggy nights during full moon. Local villagers hurry home before sunset, doors are locked, and curtains drawn tight. They know what stalks these woods after dark. It was on such a night that young Thomas, a local woodcutter's son, found himself far from home. He had lost track of time while collecting firewood, and now darkness was falling fast. The mist rolled in thick between the ancient trees, turning familiar paths into mysterious corridors of swirling gray. That's when he heard the sound that every Brunswick child learns to fear. Hoofbeats, steady and rhythmic, growing louder through the fog. At first, Thomas thought it must be a late traveler, perhaps even someone who could help him find his way home. But there was something strange about the sound. It seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere at once. Through the mist, a dark figure on horseback emerged. The horse was as black as a moonless night, its eyes glowing like hot coals. But it was the rider that made Thomas's blood run cold. Where a head should have been, there was nothing but empty air above the rider's shoulders. In his hands, he carried something wrapped in a dark cloth, dripping with what looked horribly like blood. Thomas stood frozen as the horseman drew closer. The air turned icy cold, and even the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. The horse stopped mere feet away, and the headless rider turned his body toward the boy, as if looking at him despite having no eyes to see. They say Thomas was lucky. The horseman merely pointed one hand toward the path home, before disappearing into the mist. Others who have encountered the spirit weren't so fortunate. Some have been found wandering the woods days later, their minds broken by what they witnessed. Others were never seen again. The story of how this cursed rider came to haunt the Brunswick forests varies depending on who you ask. The old folks in the taverns will tell you he was once a noble knight named Roland, who served the Duke of Brunswick with unwavering loyalty. But during a time of war, he was falsely accused of treason by jealous rivals. Despite his protests of innocence, he was condemned to death by beheading. As he stood on the execution block, Roland swore an oath that would echo through centuries. "I will not rest until I find my head and clear my name." The axe fell, but that wasn't the end of Roland's story, it was just the beginning. Others claim he was a nobleman who made a terrible pact with the devil, trading his head for unlimited power and wealth. When the devil came to collect, he took not just the nobleman's head, but his peace in death as well, condemning him to search eternally for something he can never find. What everyone agrees on is that the Headless Horseman still rides through these forests, searching endlessly for his lost head. On foggy nights, you might hear the thunder of hooves on the old forest paths. Some say he appears to those who have been wrongly accused, either as a warning or a twisted form of sympathy. Others believe he seeks victims to share his cursed fate. This is the legend of the Headless Horseman of Brunswick. Even today, visitors to the Brunswick forests are warned not to linger after sunset, especially when the fog rolls in. The people of Brunswick have learned to live with their haunted woods. They mark their doors with protective symbols and teach their children to be home before dark. When the mist rolls in and darkness falls, they tell tales of the Headless Horseman around their fires. Tales that were old long before Washington Irving ever put pen to paper about a similar spirit in Sleepy Hollow. High up in the Bavarian Alps, between spiked peaks that pierce the clouds and hidden valleys, there lives a creature that shouldn't exist. The locals call it the Tatzelwurm, and just mentioning its name makes old shepherds cross themselves and lower their voices to whispers. Hans wasn't supposed to be in the mountains that day in 1934. His father had warned him countless times about wandering too far from their alpine farm, especially into the narrow valleys where the sun barely reaches. But at 16, Hans felt invincible, and the stories of monsters seemed like nothing more than tales to scare children. That morning started like any other. Hans was searching for a lost sheep that had strayed from their flock. The late summer air was crisp, and patches of early morning mist still clung to the mountainside like torn pieces of cotton. He followed the sheep's tracks higher and higher, into a rocky ravine he'd never explored before. The first warning was the silence. In the Alps, there's always some sound, birds calling, marmots whistling, the distant tinkle of cowbells. But here everything was dead quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then he saw it. At first, Hans thought it was a massive snake sunning itself on a rock. But as he got closer, he realized this was something else entirely. It had a body as thick as a man's thigh, covered in smooth, grayish scales that seemed to shimmer despite the dim light. But unlike a snake, it had legs. Short, powerful limbs with claws that could tear through stone. Its head was broad and cat-like, with teeth that gleamed like daggers. Before Hans could move, the creature's head snapped toward him. Its eyes were like burning coals, and when it opened its mouth, he saw row upon row of serrated teeth. The Tatzelwurm rose up on its stubby legs, making a sound somewhere between a hiss and a roar that echoed off the mountain walls. Hans ran faster than he'd ever run in his life. Behind him, he could hear the creature moving with impossible speed, its claws scraping against rock. He didn't stop until he reached his family's farm, his clothes torn and his face white as snow. When his father found him, Hans could barely speak. But Hans wasn't the first to encounter the Tatzelwurm, and he wouldn't be the last. For centuries, the monster has been part of alpine life. Shepherds tell of finding their sheep torn apart, with strange tracks leading to rocky crevices. Hunters speak of hearing unnatural sounds reverberating through remote valleys. Some say the creature can even spit a poisonous venom that paralyzes its prey. In the 1900s, a photographer named Balkan claimed to have captured the beast on film. Though the picture was blurry, it showed something long and reptilian moving across a rocky slope. The photo caused such a sensation that local newspapers offered rewards for anyone who could catch or kill a Tatzelwurm. No one ever claimed the prize. Old Joseph, who runs the mountain shelter near the King's Lake, tells of his grandfather's encounter in the winter of 1892. The creature had broken into their goat pen during a snowstorm. His grandfather described it as being about 6 feet long, with a head like a cat but scales like a fish, and legs that seemed too short for its body but allowed it to move with frightening speed. This is the legend of the Tatzelwurm, the dragon of the Bavarian Alps. Even today, hikers and climbers report strange sightings in remote areas of the mountains. Some claim to have found mysterious tracks in the snow. Whether real or myth, the Tatzelwurm remains one of Germany's most enduring cryptid legends, a reminder that perhaps not all of nature's secrets have been discovered. On a cold November night in Frankfurt, Maria was about to experience something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Living alone in her third-floor apartment, she was used to the usual sounds of the city. Cars passing by, distant sirens, the hum of streetlights. But that night, at exactly 3:17 a.m., a knock on her door changed everything. At first, she thought she had imagined it. Who would be knocking at this hour? But then it came again, 3 soft, deliberate knocks. Maria approached the door cautiously, looking through the peephole. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. 2 children stood in the dimly lit hallway, a boy and a girl, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, wearing oddly formal clothes that seemed out of place in the modern apartment building. Their skin was pale, almost gray in the fluorescent lighting. "Please, can you let us in?" The girl spoke in perfect German, but her voice was wrong somehow, too mature, too controlled for a child. "We're lost, and we're so cold. We just need to use your phone to call our mother." Something deep inside Maria screamed at her to stay quiet, to pretend she wasn't home. But another part of her, the part that had been a kindergarten teacher for 20 years, couldn't bear the thought of children in trouble. "Where are your parents?" she asked through the door, her hand hovering near the lock. The children shifted slightly, and that's when they looked up directly at the peephole. Maria stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. Their eyes were completely black. No whites, no iris. Just endless pools of darkness that seemed to swallow all light. "Please," they said in unison now, their voices taking on a strange, harmonious quality that made Maria's skin crawl. "We can't come in unless you invite us. Please let us in." Maria stood frozen, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The children continued to stare at the peephole, their black eyes unblinking. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, she found her voice. "Go away," she whispered, "or I'm calling the police." The children were silent for a moment. Then the boy spoke, his voice no longer childlike but deep and sinister. "You'll regret this. We'll come back when you're ready to let us in." The hallway light flickered, and when it stabilized, the children were gone. But Maria's nightmare was just beginning. In the weeks that followed, she was plagued by mysterious illnesses that doctors couldn't explain. Her previously peaceful nights were shattered by dreams of black eyes watching her from the darkness. Some mornings, she would wake to find her furniture slightly moved, as if someone had been walking through her apartment while she slept. Her story isn't unique. Across Germany, particularly in urban areas, people report similar encounters. In Hamburg, a taxi driver picked up 2 children on a rainy night, only to discover their reflection in his rearview mirror showed empty seats. In Munich, an elderly couple who let 2 such children into their home disappeared without a trace. Their apartment found perfectly clean except for 2 small, sooty handprints on their living room wall. The pattern is always the same. The children appear late at night, asking to be let in. They seem normal at first glance, but something is always off. Their formal clothing, their odd manner of speaking, and most terrifyingly, those completely black eyes. They can't enter without being invited, but they're persistent, using a child's natural ability to evoke sympathy to try to gain entry. This is the legend of the black-eyed children. In cities across Germany, people still double-check their locks at night and think twice before answering unexpected knocks at their door. For who knows what might be waiting on the other side, asking to be let in. In a small village near the Black Forest, Lisa lay in her bed, somewhere between sleep and wakefulness. The old grandfather clock in the hallway had just struck midnight, its deep chimes ringing through the quiet house. Everything was still and peaceful, until she felt it. At first, it was just a slight pressure on her chest, as if someone had placed a heavy book there. But then the weight grew more and more, until it felt like a massive stone was crushing her. Lisa tried to move, to scream, to do anything, but her body wouldn't respond. She was completely paralyzed. That's when she saw it, emerging from the darkness in the corner of her room. A horrifying figure, hunched and twisted, crawling across her ceiling like a spider. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, its limbs too long and bent at impossible angles. As it moved closer, Lisa could feel her heart pounding against the weight on her chest. The creature descended from the ceiling, its face now inches from hers. Its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light, and its mouth was filled with needle-like teeth, arranged in concentric circles. The demon's breath smelled like rotting leaves and stagnant water, and when it grinned, Lisa saw darkness deeper than the night itself. The nightmare spirit, as the old people call it, settled itself more comfortably on her chest. With each passing second, breathing became harder. Lisa could only watch in horror as the demon leaned closer, whispering things in her ear, terrible things, secrets and fears she had buried deep inside her mind. The demon showed her visions, her worst fears coming true, her loved ones suffering, endless corridors of darkness where she wandered alone. Minutes seemed to stretch like hours. In the demon's presence, time had no meaning. Just when Lisa thought she couldn't bear another moment, just when the weight on her chest threatened to crush her completely, the first ray of dawn crept through her window. The nightmare spirit hissed like water on hot coals, its form beginning to dissolve in the growing light. As quickly as it had appeared, the nightmare demon vanished, leaving Lisa gasping for air, her nightgown soaked with sweat. Only then could she finally move, finally scream. But by then, who would believe her? The next morning, her grandmother took one look at her pale face and knew. "You've met the nightmare spirit," she said quietly, placing a protective charm on Lisa's bedside table. "It feeds on fear, on the terror of those caught between sleep and waking. It's been haunting these lands since before the first stones of our village were laid." Throughout Germany, people have reported similar encounters with the nightmare spirit. Always at night, always when they're alone, always bringing with it that terrible paralysis and those horrific visions. Some say it chooses its victims carefully, preferring those who harbor deep fears or guilty secrets. Others believe it attacks at random, feeding on the terror it creates. The demon has many names across different regions, Alb or Mar, but its method is always the same. It pins its victims down, sitting on their chest like a massive weight, while forcing them to experience their worst nightmares. In fact, the modern German word for nightmare, Albtraum, comes directly from this ancient terror, the dream of the Alb. Protective charms and rituals evolved over centuries to ward off the demon. Some people sleep with scissors or a mirror under their pillow, believing the demon fears its own reflection. Others place their shoes by the bed with the toes pointing toward the door, claiming this will force the demon to spend the night trying on the shoes instead of torturing its intended victim. In the heart of Munich stands the magnificent Frauenkirche, its twin towers reaching toward heaven like ancient guardians. But inside this holy place, there's a mark of something far from divine. A single black footprint burned into the stone floor that tells a tale of pride, trickery, and the devil himself. The story begins in 1468 when architect Georg von Halsbach faced an impossible challenge. He had been commissioned to build the largest church in Munich, but his budget was tight and time was short. As he sat in his workshop late one night, surrounded by rejected plans and failed designs, a stranger appeared. The man was elegantly dressed in black, with a charm about him that seemed almost supernatural. His smile was too perfect and his eyes held a peculiar gleam. "I couldn't help but notice your troubles," the stranger said, his voice smooth as honey. "Perhaps we could strike a deal." The stranger revealed himself as Lucifer and offered a bargain. He would provide the funds and means to build the cathedral quickly, with one condition. The building must contain no windows, keeping God's light from entering the sacred space. Von Halsbach, clever as he was desperate, agreed to the devil's terms. Construction began immediately, and the building rose with supernatural speed. The devil, pleased with himself, went off to attend to other matters, leaving the architect to his work. When the cathedral was complete, the devil returned to inspect his victory. He stood at the entrance, ready to gloat over the darkness he had brought to God's house. But when he stepped inside, he was met with an unexpected sight. The church was filled with light. The architect had outsmarted the devil. While technically keeping his promise of no windows visible from the entrance, he had designed the church with clever columns that hid the windows from certain angles. From where the devil stood at the entrance, the windows were completely hidden by the massive columns. But beyond that point, light streamed in from numerous windows, filling the sacred space with a heavenly glow. Realizing he had been tricked, the devil's rage shook the very foundations of the church. He transformed into his true form, his elegant clothes burning away to reveal darkness itself. In fury, he stamped his foot so hard that the stone floor cracked beneath him, leaving behind a black footprint that no amount of scrubbing, replacing, or blessing has ever been able to remove. Before vanishing in a cloud of sulfurous smoke, the devil cursed the building, summoning unnatural winds to destroy it. But the church stood firm, protected by the faith of its builders and the cleverness of its design. The only evidence of his visit is that strange footprint, still visible today in the entrance hall of the Frauenkirche. Some say that on particularly dark nights, when the last tourist has left and the church grows quiet, you can still feel a sudden chill near that footprint. Others claim they've heard angry muttering in ancient tongues or caught the faint smell of brimstone. The church guards who work the night shift never stand too close to that spot, and they swear the footprint sometimes glows with an inner fire. Visitors to the Frauenkirche today can still see this mysterious mark, a perfect footprint burned into the stone floor. No scientific explanation has ever been found for why this mark cannot be removed or covered. Even during the extensive renovations after World War II, when much of the church had to be rebuilt, the footprint remained untouched by both bombs and time. On the highest peak of the Harz Mountains stands the Brocken Mountain, shrouded in mist and mystery. But it's not the height that makes this mountain famous. It's what happens there when darkness falls on April 30th, the night known as Walpurgis Night, or the Witch's Night. Old Henry, the last farmer living at the foot of that mountain, remembers the night he saw them. It was April 30th, 1962, and he had stayed out too late, searching for a lost goat. As dusk settled over the area, an unusual fog began to roll in, thick and green-tinged, carrying with it the smell of burning herbs and a seeping essence of decay and whispered curses. First came the sounds, faint at first, then drawing near. Laughter, sharp and shrill, rang through the trees. Drums pounded, steady and unrelenting, and beneath it all, a deep humming that seemed to come from the earth itself. Then Henry saw them, dark silhouettes moving through the mist, hundreds of witches flying on broomsticks, pitchforks, and even giant black goats. They were heading to the summit, where already strange lights flickered and danced against the cloudy sky. Some rode high above the treetops, their wild hair streaming behind them, while others skimmed just above the ground, their faces twisted in savage joy, while their eyes glowed like burning coals in the darkness. Henry hid behind an ancient oak tree, his heart pounding heavy as the procession passed. Through gaps in the fog, he caught glimpses of their gathering at the summit. A great bonfire burned with unnatural colors, green, purple, and deep blood red. Around it, the witches danced in a frenzy, their shadows throwing unholy shapes against the flames. And there, seated on a throne of black stone, sat a figure, suffocating Henry with its presence. Taller than any man, with horns that gleamed in the firelight, the devil himself presided over this demonic celebration. His sinister laughter boomed across the mountaintop like thunder, as witch after witch approached to pay tribute and receive dark gifts of power. They say that on this night, the veil between our world and the spirit realm grows thin on Brocken Mountain. The witches gather from all corners of Germany, flying through the night to attend their dark ritual. They bring with them potions and poisons, charms and curses, sharing their wicked knowledge as they dance and feast until dawn. Some claim the mountain itself is magical. Strange lights, known as the Brocken Spectre, appear on misty days, giant shadows surrounded by rainbow-colored rings that seem to move with a life of their own. Scientists explain these as natural phenomena, but locals say these are the remains of the witches' magic, permanently etched into the mountain's memory. Even today, few dare to climb Brocken Mountain on Walpurgis Night. Those who have tried report hearing strange music, seeing mysterious lights dancing between the trees, and feeling an overwhelming sense of being watched. Some have found circles of scorched earth the next morning, still warm to the touch, where no natural fire could have burned. The mountain has its guardians too. Ancient trees that seem to move when you're not looking, and ravens that watch visitors with two intelligent eyes. They say these are the witches' familiars, left behind to guard their sacred meeting place until the next gathering. This is the legend of the witches of Blocksberg, where once a year the boundaries between our world and the supernatural dissolve, and dark magic roams freely under the spring night sky. The story has captured imaginations for centuries, inspiring works like Goethe's Faust and becoming deeply woven into German folklore and modern Halloween traditions. It also gave rise to the popular German cartoon series Bibi Blocksberg.
Hallo Leute, schön, dass ihr da seid. Ich hex uns was Tolles, ja? Hex, hex.
The road between Dresden and Leipzig gets lonely at night. That's where Marcus Bauer was driving on a rainy October evening in 1987, his headlights cutting through the mist like dull knives. He almost missed her at first, a figure in white standing by the roadside, her hand raised in a plea for help. Marcus was a practical man who drove this road twice a week, and he'd never seen anyone trying to hitchhike this late, especially not on such a nasty night. Something made him stop. Maybe it was the way she stood there, seemingly untouched by the rain, or perhaps it was simple human kindness. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, wearing a flowing white dress that seemed strangely old-fashioned. Her face was pale but beautiful, with sad eyes that seemed to hold secrets. "Can you take me to Forest Street 17?" she asked softly as she slid into the passenger seat. Her voice had an odd, distant quality, like someone speaking through water. Marcus noticed her clothes were completely dry, despite the pouring rain, but he told himself she must have been standing under a tree. The drive was quiet. Every time Marcus tried to start a conversation, she would only respond with a slight nod or a single word. He kept glancing at her in his rearview mirror, but what he saw there made his blood run cold. In the mirror's reflection, the passenger seat was empty. Yet when he turned his head, she was there, staring straight ahead with those sad eyes. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, and Marcus noticed for the first time that she wore a small golden locket around her neck. The air in the car grew increasingly cold, his breath starting to fog in front of him despite the heater running at full blast. When they reached Forest Street 17, Marcus turned to tell her they had arrived, but the seat was empty. No sound of a door opening, no footsteps on the wet pavement. She had simply vanished. The only trace of her presence was a faint scent of lilies and a cold that seemed to reach into his bones. Shaken, Marcus almost drove away, but something about those sad eyes haunted him. He got out of his car and walked up to the house, his hands trembling as he knocked on the door. An elderly woman answered, her face lined with years of grief. When Marcus described his passenger, the old woman's face went white. Without a word, she invited him in and led him to a photograph on the mantelpiece. There she was, the same young woman, wearing the same white dress and golden locket, smiling brightly at the camera. "That's my daughter, Anna," the woman said, her voice breaking. "She died 30 years ago on this very night, in a car accident on that road. She was coming home from her engagement party." The old woman touched the photograph gently. She was wearing her grandmother's white dress. They never found her locket in the wreckage. Since that night, dozens of drivers have reported similar encounters on German roads. The details vary slightly. Sometimes she's a bride heading to her wedding, sometimes a young woman trying to get home to her sick mother. But certain elements remain consistent. The white dress, the old-fashioned style, the mysterious cold, and always her vanishing before reaching her destination. Some drivers report finding wet footprints on their car seats the next morning, even though their passenger had been dry. Others claim their cars never quite warm up properly again, as if some residual chill remains. A few have even reported that their car radios pick up old songs from decades past for days after their encounter. This is the legend of the Ghost Woman. On rainy nights across Germany, drivers still report seeing young women in white standing by the roadside. Most drive past now, having heard the stories. In the oldest part of Bremen's cemetery, where ancient tombstones lean at odd angles and ivy crawls across forgotten names, stands a statue of a young woman. During the day, it's just another monument among many. Weathered limestone, hands clasped in prayer, eyes raised toward heaven. But when night falls, especially on moonless nights, something changes. Sarah, the cemetery's night guard, first heard it during her rounds last winter. It was just before midnight when the sound reached her ears, soft at first, barely distinguishable from the winter wind. But as she walked closer to the old section, it became clearer. Someone was crying. The sobs were heartbreaking, filled with such raw grief that Sarah felt tears forming in her own eyes. Following the sound, she found herself standing before the statue. In the beam of her flashlight, she saw something impossible. Real tears streaming down the stone face. The statue's expression had changed too, no longer serene and peaceful. It now wore a look of absolute anguish. As Sarah watched, frozen in disbelief, more tears welled up in the statue's stone eyes and rolled down its cheeks, leaving glistening tracks in the limestone. Then she heard the whispers, carried on the cold night air. I was innocent. I was innocent. The story behind the statue, as local historians tell it, is of Elizabeth Winters, a young healer who lived in Bremen in 1684. She had a gift for using herbs and natural remedies to cure the sick, knowledge passed down from her grandmother. People would come from miles around seeking her help, and she never turned anyone away. But when the magistrate's wife fell ill and died despite Elizabeth's attempts to save her, everything changed. The grieving magistrate, looking for someone to blame, accused Elizabeth of witchcraft. He claimed she had cursed his wife, using her healing as a cover for dark magic. The trial was a mockery of justice. Every person Elizabeth had ever helped was now viewed with suspicion. Every cure was reinterpreted as a curse. Even the flowers in her garden were presented as evidence of her dealings with the devil. On the day of her execution, Elizabeth made one final statement. My tears will never stop falling until justice is done and my innocence is known. As they led her away, a sudden storm broke over the city, the rain falling like tears from the sky. Years later, when the cemetery was built, someone commissioned a statue in her likeness. At first, it was just another memorial, but then people began to notice strange things. On certain nights, particularly around the anniversary of her death, the sound of weeping would fill the graveyard. Those brave enough to approach the statue at midnight report seeing tears of real water flowing from its stone eyes. Some say they've heard her voice, still protesting her innocence. Others claim to have felt an overwhelming sense of sadness and injustice when standing near the statue, as if Elizabeth's grief has seeped into the very ground. The statue has been examined countless times. Scientists say it's impossible for stone to cry. They've analyzed the water, claiming it's just condensation or rain. But they can't explain why the tears only appear at night, or why they taste of salt, like real human tears. Cemetery workers have their own rituals now. They leave fresh flowers at the statue's feet, and some swear they've seen the flowers perk up and bloom even in winter. Dr. Alina Weber stood frozen in the doorway of her Berlin apartment, keys still dangling from her trembling hand. There, sitting at her kitchen table, was herself. Not a reflection, not a trick of light, but her exact double, calmly drinking tea from her favorite cup. The other Lena turned slowly, meeting her gaze with eyes that were both familiar and terrifyingly wrong, like looking into a mirror that showed not just your reflection, but all your hidden darkness. Then, as Dr. Weber blinked, her double vanished, leaving only the steaming cup of tea as evidence it had ever been there. 3 days later, Dr. Weber was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. This encounter in 2019 is just one of countless doppelgänger sightings across Germany. The word itself, meaning double walker, spreads unease across Germany, for everyone knows what it means to see your own double. Doom is coming. Take the case of Karl Muller, a banker in Hamburg, who saw himself walking into his office building one morning in 1992. Thinking it strange, he followed his double up the stairs, watching as it moved with his exact gait, wore his exact clothes, even carried his exact briefcase. When the double turned around, Karl saw his own face wearing an expression of such malevolent glee that he fled the building. That evening, the bank was robbed, and 3 of Karl's colleagues were killed in his office, where he would have been if he hadn't followed his double. The phenomenon isn't limited to ordinary citizens. Even Germany's most famous poet, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, wrote about encountering his double. Riding on a country road one day, he saw himself coming the other way, wearing a gray suit he didn't own. Years later, he found himself riding the same road, realizing with a chill that he was now wearing that exact gray suit he had seen his double wearing. Some say doppelgangers are spirits that steal your face, practicing being you before they take your place. Others believe they're reflections from parallel worlds where choices went differently and darkness won out. The most terrifying theory is that they're you, or rather, the version of you that exists in the moments before death, reaching backward through time with a warning. The rules of doppelgangers, passed down through generations, are clear and chilling. Never speak to your double, it will steal your voice. Never touch it, your hand will pass through cold emptiness, and part of your soul will go with it. And most importantly, if you see your double going somewhere, go the other way. Some encounters are brief, a glimpse of yourself walking past a window when you know you're sitting down. Others are more elaborate, like the case of Anna Schmidt, who watched her double play with her children in the garden for an entire afternoon, while she stood paralyzed in her kitchen. Her children later said they thought it was their real mother, until they noticed this version of her never blinked, and its feet didn't quite touch the ground. Modern security cameras have added a new layer to the mystery. Doppelgangers don't show up on video, but their effects do. Doors opening for no one, chairs moving by themselves, cups raising to invisible lips. In 2015, a Munich office building's security system recorded an entire conference room full of people reacting to someone giving a presentation. But the footage showed an empty podium. The next day, the real presenter was found dead in his home. This is the legend of the doppelganger, where the most terrifying ghost you can meet is yourself. Christine Braun found the painting at a small antique shop in Cologne City. It was tucked away in a corner, partially hidden behind taller pieces. Something about the boy's face drew her in. Those huge, tear-filled eyes seemed to follow her around the shop, silently pleading for something she couldn't quite understand. "Ah, the crying boy," the old shopkeeper said, his voice unusually grave. Are you sure you want that one? I can show you something more cheerful. But Christine was already reaching for her wallet. The painting would be perfect for her newly renovated apartment. The troubles began subtly. A broken mirror, wilted plants, the mysterious smell of smoke, even though nothing was burning. Christine's cat, usually the friendliest creature alive, refused to enter the room where the painting hung, hissing and arching its back whenever it caught sight of those weeping eyes. Then the dreams started. Every night, Christine would see the boy from the painting, but he wasn't just crying anymore. He was trying to tell her something, his small hands pressed against what seemed like an invisible wall between them. One morning, Christine noticed something peculiar. The tears in the painting seemed to have moved, leaving different tracks down the boy's cheeks. She convinced herself it was just a trick of the light, until her neighbor mentioned the same thing during a visit. "Those tears," she said, "they weren't like that yesterday." Research led Christine to other stories, each more disturbing than the last. In 1976, a family in Stuttgart lost everything in a mysterious fire. Everything except the painting of the crying boy, which was found untouched among the ashes. In 1983, a similar incident in Hamburg. Another fire, another destroyed home, and in the center of the destruction, the painting, pristine and undamaged. Some versions of the story claim he was an orphan who burned down his orphanage. Others say he was a victim of abuse who died when his home mysteriously caught fire. But all versions agree on one thing: his spirit became trapped in the artist's rendering, and now he brings flames wherever his image goes. Christine tried to get rid of the painting. She sold it to a second-hand shop, only to find it back in her apartment the next day, propped against her bedroom wall. She tried throwing it away, but the garbage collectors would always find some reason not to take it. Even trying to destroy it proved impossible. Matches wouldn't light near it. Scissors couldn't cut the canvas. The final straw came when Christine woke one night to find her kitchen in flames. As she rushed out of her apartment, she saw the boy in the painting turning his head to watch her flee. Not just the painted eyes, but his entire head moving to follow her movement. The fire destroyed everything she owned, except, of course, for the painting. They found it in the middle of her scorched apartment, surrounded by ashes, but completely untouched. The boy's expression had changed. The tears were gone, replaced by what some swear was a small, satisfied smile. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you want more tales like this, hit like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.